Hello, and thank you for joining today's demo mobility training series session, Mobility 301 Protect. This is the third demo in a three-part series designed to get you started with enrollment and policy setting first, then take a deep dive on mobile app management and content collaboration, and then finally, how to achieve full mobile maturity. My name is Kayla Heineman, and I'm your webinar master moderating today's webinar. Lindsay LG, our mobile master from IBM, will be walking you through the MobileFirst Protect, formerly Mass 360 portal, in just a minute. Real quick, just a few housekeeping items before we begin. If you've joined a webinar with us in the past, then you might notice that we have a new look. We are using the On24 webinar platform to enhance your webinar experience. The webinar console is completely customizable, so you can enlarge the slides and minimize the speaker bio and Q&A box, so we hope you take advantage and play around with your console. The webinar is expected to last about 60 minutes and is in listen-only mode. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, so if you have a question you'd like answered, please be sure to submit it through the Q&A box located on the right-hand side of your screen. You can feel free to minimize this box if you'd like. And finally, we are recording today's session, and we'll make the link to the recording and slides available by email. So with that, I think we're ready to see how to achieve full mobile maturity with IBM MobileFirst Protect. So over to you, Lindsay.
Excellent. Thanks, Kayla. Give me just one moment. I'll share out my browser here. We're getting used to our new look here. All right. Are you able to see that, Kayla?
We are still buffering. Yep, we can see it. And I just want to remind everybody that you can enlarge your viewing area. So if it looks a little bit small, just go ahead and click maximize, and it'll blow up that view area. So, Lindsay, take it away.
Excellent. Thanks, Kayla. So I did share out my Mass 360 portal. I'm going to tackle the administrative side of things, and then I actually have a device that I can mirror out to show you our containerization later on. This is the third demo in a series. So just to recap, we went over some basic provisioning information and kind of the basics of Mass 360 MobileFirst Protect. We are primarily provided as a cloud-based solution, so we're quick and easy to deploy. We're fast to scale to a larger device count or a different type of Mass 360 management, and that's all done through this web-based portal. So definitely we believe in the cloud solution and providing a quick and easy way for you to manage your mobile devices, and that's all done through this portal here. Just to recap the home page, you've got an alert center with some visibility over particular details that you might want to keep track of. Security and compliance related alert tiles will show up as green if everything's okay, red if any action needs to be taken, and also blue for inventory or informational purposes. So that's your alert center. You'll also have device locations from the home screen if that's of interest. And of course, that's something that we can tackle with our privacy filters if there are personal devices or devices that shouldn't need to be tracked. So we do have the ability to enable and disable as we see fit, either based on ownership or even based on grouping. Using the privacy filters, that would be applied to location information for those devices, in addition to application inventory. So that's something that we talked about earlier in this series, but to recap that a little bit, this is the information that we're able to view collected from the device. All of the applications by default, if this is enabled, will display regardless of whether it's installed by MDM or the end user. So if that's a privacy concern, maybe you don't want to see Snapchat or Instagram or dating applications, you can restrict that application inventory, again, based on ownership or device groups. So just a little bit about our privacy settings there. Particularly important in a BYOD environment where you've got personal devices coming in, but as the mobile workforce grows and kind of evolves, a lot of companies are providing devices that can be used for personal or professional use cases. From the actual device record itself, there are a couple things that I wanted to highlight here. Let's see if I can find my iPad here. So we just saw the inventory. That's going to be every device that's enrolled in Mass 360. So iOS, Android, Windows Phone, those are our mobile operating systems. We do have some BlackBerry support. We also have Windows and Mac laptop and desktop management. OS 10.7 or newer for Mac. We do also work with the device enrollment program for Mac now, in addition to iOS. We do also work with Windows as far back as XP Service Pack 3. And of course, we do have Windows 10 support as well. So in your inventory, that'll be all of those devices in one place for you. From this device record here, so this is going to be an individual device that you've grabbed from your inventory. So this device is enrolled. It's managed by Mass360. This is kind of our splash page here, so just some highlights for us in regards to the inventory information, security rundown for you. We also have drop-downs, obviously, where we can provide a lot more information based on what's happening on that device. So a couple things that I wanted to show in terms of what we're pulling in here. Definitely the threat management. When we're talking about protecting these devices, the threat management is integration with IBM's Trusteer service. Trusteer is an IBM security product that was acquired several years ago now, and once we were acquired by IBM, we've worked their security into our platform for mobile devices. So this actually gives us the ability to configure Trusteer through our policies to scan devices and look for any malware that may be installed on that device, in addition to system configurations that may be suspicious, and also more advanced jailbreak and root detection. So here we're seeing our compliance details. We'll see our Trusteer key. We'll see whether the update is or the configuration is up to date. Also the last time that a risk assessment was run. So this is something that's enabled through policy, and the nice thing is that it runs in the background for your end user. So your end user doesn't have to enable anything. You don't have to make sure that they've kept anything enabled. It's part of the Mass360 product that's installed on that device. So as the day goes through, Trusteer will scan periodically. It will scan when applications are installed, and it will also rescan applications to look for any changes in malware signatures. So that's the Trusteer service. Currently, it's available for iOS and Android devices, and it is enabled through our MDM policy, which I'll show you shortly. But this would be kind of your rundown on the single device level here. The other thing that I wanted to show is obviously the MDM action. So looking at protecting devices, maybe a device that's been left behind in a coffee shop or a taxi cab, you can remotely lock that device. You can selectively wipe corporate information or organizational data that's been issued out to that device. If you're not familiar with the selective wipe process, that is essentially where we issue a command that removes any information or configurations or policy from that device that has been issued by Mass360. So through the MobileFirst Protect platform here, we have the ability to configure access to a lot of organizational data, Wi-Fi networks and passwords, VPN configurations. Anything of that nature is considered corporate data and can be removed upon selective wipe. So if it's a matter of a missing device, regardless of ownership, you don't want that information jeopardized, you can remove that with selective wipe, and you actually have the ability to reconfigure that access down the road by revoking that selective wipe. So if you have an end user maybe that's out on a Friday night, they lose their phone at a party, they call you up on Saturday and realize that they don't have that device, you can selectively wipe your information, and that end user can take care of actually recovering their own personal device. Now, if they recover that device, we can revoke that selective wipe and send all of those configurations back to them. If they do not recover that device, we do have the option of fully wiping from here. The end user can also do this through a self-service portal that can be enabled for them. We do also have a remove control feature down below that will allow you to perform the selective wipe in addition to removing Mass360 control of the device. So this is kind of a nice last resort if a device is not expected to be recovered. Maybe the end user just decided to get a new iPhone, or an end user perhaps is taking their own personal device and leaving the organization. So it's a nice handshake, parting of ways without having to be hands-on with their devices. You can see there's also some help desk level functions here, resetting the device passcode. My iPad here is supervised, so you're seeing some of those features as well, like setting the device name, for example. You can do that with supervised devices that come from device enrollment program from Apple. So there are a couple of features that will look a little bit differently, but you'll still have shortcuts like changing the policies and rule sets and even expense plans if this is a data-enabled device. The buzz alarm is really meant to sound an alarm to help track down a device that may have been misplaced. So, maybe an end user has left their phone in the coffee area or a lunchroom. You can sound that alarm, help track it down, maybe lock the device remotely and make sure that no one's going through any emails or pictures or anything like that. Messaging is obviously a really helpful feature because this is an area where you can send a message down to a single device here, or we can choose a message to go down to a device group. So if you wanted to query maybe all of the iPhones that need to be updated in your inventory, or you wanted to pull all of your iPhones and let everyone know that they're eligible for upgrades through their carrier, you could create a device group out of that, create a message, and send it out to everyone at once. The nice thing about this message is that it's device level, so it's going to pop up on that end user screen. They're also going to have a record of it in the Mass 360 application. So it's kind of a nice way to communicate to the end users if you don't have email configured on the device or you don't want to provide a message via email and you would rather have the end user see it a little bit more quickly. Now the locate button here, this is a snapshot for you of where this device is last checked in for my iPad. You can see this is my, my location whereabouts. You'll also have something called location information on the left-hand side. So if you would like to track where this device has been over a period of time, you have that option as well. You can see that I've disabled the use of location services on this particular device. I find my device is also disabled. This is a nice area to report on if you are providing iOS devices to your end users. If you have trouble with the activation lock, for example, you'll be able to see who has that feature enabled or disabled. You could create device groups looking for devices that have it enabled and let the end users know that they need to turn that feature off. So because you're able to lock, locate, and wipe through the Mass 360 portal, you'll still be able to provide that location history without having that feature turn on if it's giving you any trouble there. Now, I do want to move to our policies because there are a lot of different ways that we can provide protection to our policies. We have different types of policies. So I'm going to start out with our MDM, which is our device level configurations. You'll see an MDM policy based on device type. There's iOS, Android, Windows Phone, OS 10, Windows Phone, and Windows laptop and desktop policy. So depending on how you're configuring your workforce, you could have these policies configured to mandate a passcode on the device level. This is going to be up to the admin to configure minimum requirements, and then the end user will actually choose that passcode. So anything from your passcode length to alphanumeric, passcode age, even the number of failed attempts before that data is erased can be set through our policy and then mandated on that device. In terms of restrictions, there are a couple of different mindsets depending on who owns the device and how managed the device really needs to be. These restrictions here are going to be device level. So these are going to be things like turning off a camera or FaceTime, enforcing encryption on maybe Android devices that didn't come natively encrypted, allowing Touch ID or Cortana or something of that nature. So this is where we would see more along the lines of an organizational device being provided to a workforce where you really want to lock it down and make sure it's only being used for work purposes. We wouldn't see too many of these features being enabled on a personal device because you wouldn't want to restrict too much usability on a device owned by the employee rather than the organization. You do have some settings for iCloud, for example, just allowing cloud backup. You can do that for Android devices as well with your Google Play area. You will also have a couple of features specific to iOS that I always like to point out. Open managed to unmanaged and vice versa. These were introduced with iOS 7. You'll see that on the badges on the right-hand side. When we're talking about protecting, this can certainly deal with corporate information. And what this feature allows you to do is allow or disallow files from managed applications. So those are applications that have been pushed and installed through Mass 360 MDM, allowing those files to open in applications that did not come from MDM and work. So basically saying if you install this on your own, it has nothing to do with work. We don't want our files from our work applications to open up in those applications. So it gives you a little bit of protection over where that information can move about outside of the containerization. So we'll talk about our container in just a minute, but this kind of extends out to the device level as well in this restrictions area. Application compliance is really related to apps that should or should not be present on this device. So again, depending on ownership, this could change how these policies are configured for your end user. Blacklist being applications that should not be installed. Maybe you don't want to see Snapchat on these devices. You can set that as a blacklisted application, and then we can set compliance in our compliance rules, which we're going to touch on also. So really this is saying this is an application I do not want on your device. If we see that this application is installed on your device, then we're going to take this action. So that's the blacklist. The whitelist works along similar lines except you're approving apps. So this is saying these are applications that we want to see on these devices. We don't want anything else installed aside from this list. So you could whitelist a slew of corporate applications and make sure that nothing else is installed basically at that point. Now for personal devices, again, we wouldn't see too many restrictions along the lines of apps being installed, but we could configure, for example, required apps so that we know, for example, if someone's removed the Mass 360 container application from their device. which is particularly important on the iOS side of things. We want to make sure that that application is present because it does give us some other functions like jailbreak detection, for example, and location information. The active sync configuration is exactly that. So this is pushing active sync settings to the device level of mail client. But the trustier is really something that I wanted to show you because it's extremely simple to enable. It's just a checkbox here that turns on trustier threat management through compliance. And then you have the ability to configure any exceptions that should be bypassed in the future scans. So if you have an application, for example, that came installed on the device, that can't be removed, but it's being flagged as malware because of access that's granted in the application, you could configure it as an exception so that it's bypassed and it doesn't throw up that red flag every time that device is scanned. So really once that's enabled and you publish that policy out to the end users, that end user will have that trustier enabled on the back end. You can configure that to scan the devices, especially BYOD, where you don't really have control over which apps are being installed. And you can make sure that if there are any applications that could be malicious, that you have your information protected at all times, and the end user can kind of take care of their personal device side of things. Wi-Fi and VPN, AirPrint settings, these are just configurations you can push down to the end user. Wi-Fi is nice because you can push down a network and a password if necessary. You don't have to disclose that password to the end user, so it does give you a little bit of protection in that sense because if you selectively wipe this, they no longer have access to that network, nor do they have the password. So it can be really handy if you've got secure networks that you wouldn't necessarily want to disclose to the end user but may want to grant access to. You can make sure that only enrolled devices receive that Wi-Fi network. The supervised settings are something else that I just wanted to touch on quickly. We did talk about this in an earlier demo in the series, but anytime we're talking about protecting a fleet of devices that may be iOS devices, supervision is something that comes from Apple Configurator or Device Enrollment Program, which is kind of where Apple Configurator has matured to. And it does allow some features and restrictions that wouldn't normally be allowed on iOS devices. So if you're looking at some extra protection, for example, allowing or disallowing activation locks for those rich devices that may not be helpful for you, turning off AirDrop if you're concerned about data flow. There's all kinds of new settings with iOS 9 that came out, like passcode modification and Apple Watch allowances. So this will give you a lot of capabilities that wouldn't typically be allowed on those devices to configure some extra restrictions and protection on your iOS side of things. So that's our MDM policy here. I want to touch on the compliance rules briefly because once you have a policy configured that sets restrictions on your device level, you could also configure compliance rules to take action for you if a device is placed out of compliance. So if you have, for example, maybe a policy that mandates that people cannot use Instagram on their company-provided devices, and we see that an application has been installed that has been blacklisted like Instagram, we can set a compliance rule, enforcement rule that takes action for us after we detect that. So this could be one action that just says you've broken the rules, we're taking back our information, which is fairly common on personal devices if there's the potential for your information being jeopardized. It could also be a series of actions. So it could be anything from an alert notification saying you are out of compliance, please do this in the next 2 hours, otherwise we're going to take this action. It could be a selective wipe of company data, anything that's configured through Mass 360. It could be a change of policy. So if someone installs Instagram, maybe you take away their camera on a company-provided device, or maybe you enforce a 10-digit passcode if someone has removed Mass 360 application or something of that nature. So it can be any combination of those things. It can be a series of actions that ends in a full wipe even if you wanted to. It's really up to the admin to configure these rules how they see fit. Notifications go a long way with an end user when they realize that the admins have visibility over all of these things. They're a little bit more hesitant to break the rules at that point. But we do also have a feature you see here called block. And a block is a block of the device on the mail server. So this utilizes the Mass 360 Cloud Extender, which we did touch on earlier in the series. But just to recap the Cloud Extender, it is a piece of software that we provided to our customers. And it provides different modules for integration in your environment. So when we're talking about blocking the mail server, we're talking about Exchange or Lotus or Office 365 or Google. Being able to issue a block command to that mail server that says this device is out of compliance with Mass 360. We don't want to deliver mail until it's back into compliance. So it can be very nice if someone, for example, has removed the required application, or maybe there is maybe a jailbroken device, something of that nature. So that uses the cloud extender, and there's no charge for that piece of software. And it does give you integration with other features like your Active Directory. We can even provide a module for the Mobile Enterprise Gateway that connects to internal resources, intranets, file shares, that kind of thing. The last rule that I wanted to touch on is the enrollment rule. The enrollment rule uses Cloud Extender to make sure that devices are enrolled and managed in NAS 360, and if they're not, we want to block that mail until they are. So if you have an end user, for example, who has gotten a new iPhone for Christmas, maybe they decide they just want to grab that ActiveSync configuration and plug it into their new iPhone. They don't really need to go through the enrollment of NAS 360. Using that ActiveSync configuration kind of hand in hand with your mail server and Cloud Extender, we can see that that device is not enrolled. It's trying to get mail via ActiveSync, and until they complete this enrollment request that's sent automatically, we're going to block that mail from being delivered. So it gives you protection, making sure that people aren't bypassing NAS 360. And we even have an auto-quarantine feature where we can make sure that the only mail that's received is mail that's received through our container. So it's kind of a nice segue into our other policy. Our persona policy is where we configure the workplace persona or the container for the end user. So this is configuring the NAS 360 application to receive corporate information inside of that app rather than the native side of things. It's extremely popular with BYOD devices because it is going to separate work information completely from personal. And it's very popular with the admins because it's a user-friendly interface. It's a very native experience for the end users. And you can selectively wipe all of that information from the container and from the device without having to worry about wiping things like personal photos and text messages and that kind of thing. So it's kind of a win-win for the end user and the admin. You can see our services here make up our secure productivity suite. So we have a document editor, a document viewer for Android, secure browser, secure mail. And you can see here you can upload a usage policy for your end users as well for your mobile policy. Once your services are enabled, you have the ability to mandate a passcode on the application level. So again, very user-friendly with BYOD because you don't necessarily want to mandate a ridiculous passcode on the device level, which belongs to the end user, but maybe you want that extra security over your work content. We do allow Touch ID with iOS, and we can also use a corporate password as the passcode to the container if you have that AD integration in place. So it does give you some extra security in the event that maybe someone's device has been lost or stolen. Your work information will be kind of restricted to this container or application entirely, and inaccessible to the person who might have the device actually in hand. From a security standpoint, we did some device-level security up top. Restrictions for jailbroken or rooted devices. So if we detect that someone has jailbroken their iPhone, for example, we can prevent access to the container where all of the services are provided, like your documents or your email attachments or anything along those lines. With the Trusteer integration, we can restrict access with devices that contain malware to make sure that they can't access any of the information inside of that container as well. The time-bound feature allows a timestamp anywhere from a week to a year, where if that container is not accessed in that time frame, it gets selectively wiped from the device. So again, very helpful with personal devices where you don't have control over where that device is going. You can make sure that the information is not accessible after that timestamp in the event that maybe someone has handed an iPhone down to a younger sibling, or perhaps they have donated a device to Goodwill or a charity around their location. You can make sure that if it hasn't been wiped, at least your information has. And then the data protection policies kind of boil down to what we call our data loss prevention measures. So this allows us to specify where this information can go. So by restricting copy-paste, for example, making sure that someone can't copy maybe an email content from the NAS 360 application inside of the container and paste it externally to an application that's not managed. So it didn't come from work, it has nothing to do with work, maybe we don't want our information moving into Dropbox, for example. We can set these restrictions and even a restrictive file export to make sure that if someone receives an email attachment or access to a SharePoint or a file share, they can't just take that information and move it to an application that has not been whitelisted in advance. So you can see here that anything inside of my container can be exported to WebEx meetings, nothing else. That's the only thing that's whitelisted for me at this time. We also have things for restricting print, screenshots, import of files, widgets, notifications when the application is locked. And you will see the container is fairly agnostic in terms of providing an end user resource on the device via application. But there are some capabilities that are available on some platforms and not others. So you'll always see those badges specifying what this feature is available for. A really good example, screenshot inside of the container is only available on Android. On iOS, we have the ability to disable the screenshot on the device level only, where Android, you have that capability on both the device level and the container level. So once your security is configured, you have the ability to provide email inside of that container if you'd like. So again, what we're doing is we're grabbing that Active Sync configuration, the Google Sync configuration, we're putting it inside of this policy to deliver to the container rather than the native mail client. That gives us all of the workplace security settings to protect that mail content, in addition to our own security tab regarding the mail security settings, where we can do things like a really strict attachment forwarding. Now, the nice thing about all of our policies is that they can be very specific to who you're looking to manage. So you could have as many policies as you really need. And for example, maybe only your finance department should have restrictions regarding attachment forwarding. You don't want your financial information forwarded except inside of your own domain, for example. Or maybe you'd like to restrict email to external domains altogether for a specific department that really should only be working internally. This is also really great for contractors who may be working with a specific department. You can make sure that they're not using their mail inappropriately. The last part of our persona policy here is our secure browser. So the browser has a couple of different use cases that come in handy. It is based on the native browser of the device, so it would be comparable to Safari or Google Chrome or something of that nature, depending on what type of device you're using. So you have the ability with the secure browser to apply our workplace passcode, so our passcode requirement on the application level, and any security settings that we placed in our policy already. So we can extend that to the browser, which is particularly helpful when we're working with the enterprise gateway. And the gateway is the resource that will give you the ability to tunnel into internal resources. So if you have an intranet site, for example, you can use the Mobile Enterprise Gateway to grant access without the need of a VPN session by creating an SSL tunnel. So again, that's a module of our cloud extender. It's a very simple software setup, and it provides that internal access that you can remove at any point using selective light. So there's lots of default settings. If you just wanted, for example, to push out bookmarks, we get a lot of bookmarks through IBM with our secure browser, just to make it easier to access and not have to remember so many internal links, for example. We also have kiosk mode. So we have, for example, some transit companies that use kiosk mode to make sure that the end user can only get to one site. So you can allow access to a specific URL and then take away navigation from that URL. You can see there are some other settings, just kind of configures the browser itself, and then you have settings for URL filtering as well. So the URL filtering is really if you want to enable or disable access to specific types of websites. Through this URL filtering, you can choose different categories that may or may not be work appropriate depending on what that end user should be doing on the devices. Again, we would typically see this on an organizational device rather than a personal device because you wouldn't want to restrict access to different types of sites on a personal device. Now, this is going to be a completely separate browser again, so it's going to be comparable to the native browser in functionality and visibility. But you can set these restrictions so that, for example, people can't get to malware sites, they can't get to peer-to-peer sites or job search sites. Any of these things that are not work appropriate, for example, or even school appropriate in education, we see this as well. We can provide these restrictions that can either block access altogether, it can block access and track this access and report back to the administrator, or you can allow the access and track that activity if the admin wants to see what types of sites are being visited, and then maybe provide rules and restrictions based on how many people are really trying to access these sites. You can see here you can configure as many as you need. You also have the ability to configure allowed or disallowed URLs or domains. So, for example, we have social networking restricted up top, but we have provided access to LinkedIn as a whitelisted exception. So even though LinkedIn falls under social networking, it has been whitelisted for access because it's considered work appropriate for this particular policy. So once all of these settings are in place, this will basically make up your workplace persona. It is a user-based policy, so if I have an iPhone and maybe a Samsung tablet, I'll have the same restrictions in place for my data on both devices, even though they're different types of devices. So it's a very user-friendly process for the admin to configure these policies. The workplace app here, this is regarding applications that contain the Maps 360 SDK. So there are a couple of ways that we get those applications. One, it could be an enterprise application that's been developed by your organization. you do have access to our SDK to work that into your app coding if you'd like, and then that can work with our security policies here in our persona. We also do have something called the Master 360 Market, where public applications work with our SDK for our mutual customers' benefit. So, for example, Tiger Text on the Master 360 Market works with our SDK, so we can include that as a workplace application and even extend things like our passcode to that application for work purposes and to make sure that it's under our protection. You can see here we can also use the gateway with those applications. We can even use directory authentication for inside of those enterprise apps to make sure that the end user can get to internal resources via an internally developed application that wants to work hand in hand with Master 360 security. So lots of information there in terms of the persona policy. That makes up our container again. So the container is the Master 360 application. It does provide you with 256-bit AES encryption for all data that resides inside of the container. And it's also a 5140-2 compliant container. So lots of higher regulated industries like our container, even for organizational devices, because it does provide that extra security over what could be potentially very sensitive information. So we looked at our compliance rules a little bit in terms of our enforcement rules. We do have some other features that are available with our enforcement or our compliance rules. One being geofencing. So we could take those enforcement actions and restrict a device's features and functionality, or even send alerts to an admin if a device has left an area. So we could set a geofence potentially around a Wi-Fi SSID, for example, that says that if this device is located outside of this network, we want to know about it. So this is very popular with kiosk devices in bank lobbies or healthcare organizations that really shouldn't be leaving the premises. And it's also very popular with educational environments, maybe in libraries where people are issuing out devices for the end users that really shouldn't be bringing them home. So we can take these actions based on a device being located outside of that geofence, and then when it's back inside of the geofence, everything is returned to normal. We do also have expense monitoring here, so just as a note, that is something that allows compliance set around data usage on a device. So if you have a device that's exceeding data on a regular basis, we can change policies, we can send notifications, and it's all based on in-network or roaming data on different thresholds here. So those are our compliance rules. I did want to touch a little bit about application deployment and documents before we take a look at that container on my iPad here. As you can see here, we've built an app catalog on the admin side of things where we can distribute public and enterprise applications. So I can pull up an enterprise application and I can upgrade it from here to my end users, which makes it very user-friendly for the admin to make sure everyone's got the right versioning, everyone's got this app installed, and also be able to remove this application if an end user leaves the organization with that proprietary information. To add an application, it's really a matter of pulling either from the public app store or uploading an application file for the end user, depending on the device type. So, for example, if I wanted to grab the Master 360 suite of applications and send them out to the end user, I could grab that application one at a time and specify my distributions and my policies. So things like removing upon selective wipe or restricting data backup to iTunes or Google Play, and then choosing my distribution target down to a specific device, a group of devices, which again, if we're using AD or LDAP integration, could be a device group that's already created in your directory, or we can provide this for all devices. And then really it's just a matter of adding that application and notifying the end user in a way that you see fit here. Now you'll see on my device when I share that out, we do have a brandable app catalog where the end user will access all of these applications that have been distributed. So if they get a notification that a new application is available, they'll be able to see what's required, what's not required, what has updates missing inside of that app catalog. And all of that will be controlled from the end user's device from the public app store. Now we do also have enterprise apps. So this again is a matter of uploading your IPA or APK files to send out to those end users. Your policies and distributions, again, upon selective wipe, for example, restricting data backup to iTunes. With enterprise apps, you'll see a different feature called apply workplace policies. So we saw our workplace policy within that persona where we can enforce a passcode, for example, and apply those settings right to this application we've developed internally. So this is what we call app wrapping. It doesn't require any code alteration. It's really just a checkbox to take that policy there and extend it to our application here. Now again, we do also offer our SDK. If you want some more advanced features like accessing that internal resource using our gateway, you can work our SDK into your application coding and provide that access through the workplace apps. Now, documentation, there's a lot of documentation that can be provided by uploading and hosting that information through Mass360. Again, with the protection in place through our policy, if you wanted to, you could apply security settings just based on the single document distribution, password protecting, maybe on a BYOD environment you would want to download only on Wi-Fi. And this feature here is very popular also to make sure that people always have access to an employee handbook, for example, or maybe security documentation that should always be accessible for that end user. This prevents this document from ever being deleted from the container as long as it's been downloaded. So you can choose your distribution targets again, and once you do that, you can also set a start and an expiration time. So if this is something that should be renewed annually, we can make sure that the new version is available at the start of the first of the year. Or you can just use this for meeting minutes, for example, to make sure that on a weekly basis everyone's got the right versions of the documentation. So those are documents being uploaded through Mass360. We also have the ability to provide access to content sources in your environment behind your firewall. So a really great example may be a file share on your network. We could use that mobile enterprise gateway to create a file share resource inside of the Mass360 container, which would, of course, be included in that selective wipe once you've maybe got an offboarding employee, for example. So we can provide access to that resource. We can set our gateway. We can set group access permissions for whether we'd like to use that persona policy with our workplace settings, just restrict export or lift all restrictions altogether. So depending on who this is and who this is available for, maybe they don't have any restrictions, or maybe it's very locked down using our data loss prevention measures. Now that's for a SharePoint, a file share. We do have OneDrive for business access configurations. We can also configure Box and Google Drive accounts, IBM connections files, and any sources based on the CMIS protocol. So this would be inside of that Mass360 application, so part of our secure productivity suite and part of that persona policy as well. So at this point, what I want to do is go ahead and share out my iPad so that everyone can see our actual container. And you should see this in just one moment here. There we go, maybe. There we go. Sheila, will you let me know when you can see my iPad?
Yep, we can see it.
You can see it. Perfect. Okay. Just want to make sure with our new software. So you should be able to see my iPad screen here. I did share this out so that people could see our container and our app catalog and our secure productivity suite. So when we're talking about Protect, which is the main focus of this demo today, the container is really what protects your organizational data. So my iPad, you can see my suite of applications is really just mixed in with all of my other apps on my device. So during enrollment, there will be a URL-based enrollment to actually get the device enrolled into Mass360. And this allows you to set those policies to push out to those devices once they're enrolled. So my iPad is enrolled in Mass360. You can see some of my applications here, my browser, my app catalog, my Mass360 app, even my editor down at the bottom. So I'll start with the app catalog. We looked at the apps being distributed through the portal. This could contain enterprise applications that you've developed yourself. It could contain public apps that you think are helpful for your end users. It could require applications like TigerText. Maybe it's a healthcare organization. You use TigerText for compliance purposes. We can see that those apps are all included here. So these are some featured applications. I can create app bundles as well for my end user as the admin. And I can also see what's most downloaded through here, what the latest applications are that have been distributed. So if I want to, I can see all from here. I can also go to my apps in particular and see what's been pushed out to me. So this will be particular to the actual distribution, including my device. So regardless of whether it was sent to just my device or a group that I'm involved in, or maybe all devices, I have access to that. So I'll be able to see what categories are present here. I can see what types of applications have been distributed. Maybe it's a web app, maybe it's a corporate application. I can also see what price might include these applications. So for prepaid, we do work with the VPP, the Volume Purchase Program with Apple, and these applications have been prepaid for me. So using VPP, you can purchase bulk licenses either for free applications to help with the installation process on iOS devices, or to prepay for applications so that the end user is not prompted. The nice thing about this is that if an end user brings their own device into the organization, you pay for that app. When you selectively wipe that application, you can remove that app and the license so that it can be redistributed to that person's replacement. So a really helpful program if you've got a lot of applications there. And really, you know, it's pretty self-explanatory from here. We can see that my apps are largely installed, I think, for the most part. There's a couple that I still need to get, but I'll also be able to see whether it's required or not. So I've got some installed. I've got some that need to be updated, but it'll all be accessible from this app catalog for me. The Master360 container itself, so this is the Master360 app. Inside of here, we'll see my workplace that's been configured based on my persona policy. So my passcode, enter my passcode. Again, this can leverage Touch ID for iOS devices. It can leverage a corporate password if we have AD or LDAP integration. And then this is my landing page where I'll see any services that have been configured for me. So email, again, active sync email. We saw that configuration in the policy. I can see very native experience. So this is very similar to what I would see in the built-in mail client, with the exception that I can apply policy and protection around this data itself. So if I have restrictions in place, you see I cannot edit this document based on my policy up top. You can see what my allowances are. I can open in, I can print this file. It's really just based on what's configured in that policy. If I have restrictions about cut, copy, paste, I'll be able to copy this, and then if I try to paste it onto the native side of the device, I'll get an error that is against corporate policy. So again, as restrictive or as lenient as you really need it to be. The calendar is just going to pull in using that active sync. So the nice thing is that you'll be able to invite people from here. You'll be able to essentially create a new event comparable to what you would do in the native calendar, except that it's going to fall under the protection of the container itself. You do also have contacts available through the container, so you can choose whether to export those contacts or not in policy. And you have some settings as well. So for example, if I wanted to create an out-of-office notification, I could do that right from my container. So I can enable my out-of-office, I can type it up and specify who it applies to and when, and I don't ever have to leave my Master360 application. So the documentation, again, I'll have my corporate distributed. This is the process of uploading documentation and sending it out through Master360. So any of those documents will be available here. This document can be edited. So if I tap that edit button, it should bring me to my secure editor. I did just enroll this device, so it might not have registered yet, but we're going to see in just a minute here. And really what that allows you to do is specify whether this shouldn't leave the container or not. So if I want to open this in my editor, it'll probably ask me to accept that I have enrolled in Master360. There we go. And this will allow me to make changes to my document. It will allow me to create new documents if I want to. If I have to highlight text or send something back to someone completed, I can do that from the editor. I can also, you can see I've got text files, PowerPoint files, Excel files. Any of that can be created from the container itself. So anything that's also compatible with that Office documentation as well. So I'll go back to Master360 to look at our other document resources. We do have access to a SharePoint site here, so I will have to log in order to have access to that SharePoint that's based on my permissions as well. My Box and Google Drive are really just based on my account configuration. So any documents that are inside of that drive, I'll be able to see here. And then again, based on my policy and allowances, I may be able to edit this. I may be able to delete it. It really depends on what my admin has given me. Now, obviously, the benefit of the containerization of these document sources is that if I have access to a corporate Google Drive account and it's configured within my container, my admin can remove that at any time. So if that contains sensitive information, it may need to be selectively wiped if an end user leaves the company, for example. The other application here is the secure browser. So if I want to open the browser, that's what's going to give me the intranet access. And maybe I have a timesheet web app, or maybe I need to be able to log into an intranet site to get to my benefits. That can all be granted through the secure browser, and I would just again log in using my credentials. So if I have that access granted, let's see if I can get to an internal site here. That will allow me to get to that site once I have logged into my with my AD credentials. So it does just depend on whether that person's authenticated, but because I've authenticated, I have access to that internal ticketing site for my organization here. So that's a large portion of our apps here. We saw our app catalog, our browser, our editor. There are some other applications here that use our SDK. So as an example, we have our box for EMM. So if you're a box customer already, we do have the ability to provide that box application using our SDK now and some extra security measures. But really, again, the goal is just to make sure that the data is protected at all times using the persona policy, the device is protected at all times using the MDM policy and that trustier threat management, and that the end user still has a positive experience and wants to use these products on their mobile device so that we can keep them productive for you. So with that, I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to take a look at any of the questions that might have come in and hand things back to Kayla right now, just to catch my breath and take a look at what we got here.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. And everyone, we do encourage you to go ahead and submit your questions because we will be dedicating the rest of the time here to your questions. If you've minimized the Q&A box, you can bring it back up by selecting that purple Q&A icon at the bottom middle of your screen. So go ahead and get those questions in. While Lindsay's looking over the questions, I do want to take this time to remind everybody that we are recording today's session. And watch your inbox because we'll be sending out an email that will provide you access to the recording and slides for today's event. So with that, we'll go ahead and start answering your questions. Lindsay?
Excellent. Thanks, Kayla. So I have a question from, it looks like someone who is currently selling our solution, and it's regarding the container and what percentage of our clients utilize the container. So again, Master60 is very customizable, so it kind of depends on the needs of the customer. I don't have an actual percentage. I can tell you based on my experience working with potential customers and also with people who are currently a full Master60 customer. We have BYOD customers who really like the container solution, so I would say that most of our BYOD environments do utilize that container. Now we do have something called standalone, which is available without the MDM control. So that is simply providing that Master60 secure productivity suite and being able to remove it. There's no device-level agent that's installed. There's no MDM policy. It is simply the container and a collective wipe. So that's also very popular if you've got people who are concerned about maybe fully wiping a personal device, for example. But in terms of percentage, I would say that a large percentage of the BYOD environments utilize the container. And anyone who's looking for something like HIPAA compliance, for example, that encrypted container is going to make sure that the data is protected regardless of whether the device is encrypted. Also, the government entities obviously like the container regardless of ownership because it does give the encryption, the FIPS 140-2 compliance, the ability to remove any sensitive data. So I would say, you know, if it's just maybe a transit company that's looking to lock and locate devices, MDM is probably sufficient for something like that to make sure that the device is protected since it's organizational. But for anyone with a personal device or a device that's got to remain in compliance with a higher regulation, the container would be the way to go there. And we're certainly happy to get you on the phone with part of our channel team if you have other questions about actually selling Master60 to your customers as well. I have a question regarding an Apple certificate serial number. I'm not entirely clear on which cert you're referring to here. There are a lot of resources that are available once the device is enrolled. The serial numbers for the device, handshake with the DEP portal, obviously from the Master60 portal itself. If you wanted to, we could potentially elaborate if we had a little more information regarding which certificate you're looking for. But any of that information would be available inside of the portal once the device is enrolled. And it really is just going to depend on what kind of information we're looking for and whether Apple gives us access to it or not. I have a question regarding options on my screen. So this is a good point. Depending on how much access an admin is given when that admin role is created, you may see different capabilities and features inside of the portal. The other thing is that your portal may look different depending on what you have access to in a contract or a trial environment. Some features need to be enabled by our engineering team, so I may have to turn something on for you as an example that doesn't come default in the portal. So Master60 is very modular. You can pick and choose exactly which part of the solution works out for you. But if there's anything that you've seen today that you want to test out or try out, We do have a customer support team that's available 24/7, 365 at no charge. And we also provide what's called engineering calls. So we can set you up with a 30-day free trial of Mass 360, and we can give you full access to a portal with all of the features we've talked about today and more. So if you did want to test out Mass 360, feel free to reach out to us so we can help you set up a trial, test out any of our integrations, or try any of the features that we've talked about today. Is the container available for MacBook? If not, when can we expect it? The container is not currently available on the laptop and desktop side of things, so not currently available for MacBooks. However, we do have documentation available on the Mac side of things. So I don't have an ETA on the roadmap for the container for laptop, desktop, because the operating system is structured a little bit differently. But certainly if you were looking for a document sync, for example, we could give access to secure documents on a Mac. You could upload documentation to that repository on the computer, and the end user would be able to access it from the mobile devices as well. So depending on what kind of access and what features of the container you're looking for, we could potentially provide some access at least to corporate information between the laptop, desktop side of things and the mobile devices. And just a reminder, we do have a customer support team that can help set up these trials at any time. So if there's anything that you have not seen today that we may have covered in an earlier webinar or that I may have referenced from an earlier webinar, that is something that we're happy to touch on in a more one-on-one basis. So we can have a demo with you that's a little more personalized to your environment and make sure that we're covering all of your bases if you have any specific concerns. That way we can touch on that during the demo. We can help set you up with your trial. And then if you decide that you love Mass 360 and want to go ahead and sign with us, we can flip a switch and move you from trial to full customer without having to re-enroll any devices or reset up any of that integration feature for you. And it looks like I've gotten to all of our questions so far. If you do have any questions, you can submit it through Q&A. But Kayla, it does look like I am caught up here.
All right, thanks, Lindsay. And thank you, everyone, for your questions. Just watch your inbox for that email containing the recording and slides. That way you can review anything you missed or share it with others. On behalf of all of us here at IBM, we hope you enjoyed today's presentation and have a productive and secure rest of your day. Thanks again.
Thanks for your time.